Commander Legends is right around the corner, and it's looking like a really cool new set. So today, I'm going to look at one of the new commanders, and build a deck around my favourite card from the set, Wheel of Misfortune. So if we're building around a wheel, then it only makes sense we build a wheels deck. And that means the most obvious choice of commanders would be Nekazar the Mindraiser. But no, you can find a million Nekazar decks online, so let's tread some new ground. One of my favourite things to do with wheel spells is to cast them into a Smothering Tithe, refilling my hand and giving me a ton of mana to do lots of things with. For that reason, I've gone with the new Borca Spectral Sergeant for my commander, giving us a more unique Boros take on the wheels deck. In order to build an off-colour deck like this, because normally you would have blue in a wheels deck, we need to stretch the budget up to $300 instead of the normal $100 budget decks that I normally do. For that reason, this deck is built to a higher power level with stronger removal, soft stacks, and combos. Borca is a 4-mana Spirit Soldier, costing 2, a white and a red, with power and toughness star 5. At the beginning of your upkeep, he exiles a card from the top of your library, and his power becomes the highest converted mana cost of cards exiled this turn. You can then play the card he exiled until end of turn. Now this wording is a little bit tricky, but his power is affected by all cards that get exiled, not just the one he exiles. So if you Swords to Plowshare something, his power will grow from that as well. Most of the time, however, he's simply going to be a Boros value commander, effectively drawing an extra card per turn. This doesn't seem like much compared to most of the value engines in green, blue or black, but this is about as good as it gets for Boros at the moment. The aim of this deck is to kill our opponents with card draw and discard. So let's talk about the wheel effects we're running. Reforge the Soul, Magus of the Wheel, Runehorn Hellkite, and Dragon Mage are our traditional wheel effects. These will discard everyone's hand and force them to draw 7 new cards. Then we have our Windfall style wheels, such as Winds of Change, Incendiary Command, Korvath's Fury, and Molten Psyche, which discards or shuffles our hand and draws roughly equal to the number of cards each player had in their hand. Then we have a few self-wheels that just let us replace our own hands. These include Valakut Awakening, Shattered Perception, and Neheb the Dread Horde Champion. These can be useful just to help us dig further in our library when we have a handful of junk. Lastly, we need to talk about Wheel of Misfortune, the inspiration for this deck. When you don't have a payoff out, this is just a cool political card at the table, but when you do have a Smothering Tithe out, basically a 3-mana, discard your hand and draw a new 7. This is obviously an attempt to print a new Wheel of Fortune, which has been left out of this deck due to the insane price of it, but the fact your opponents can all choose 0 and avoid any kind of wheeling does undermine this card slightly for what we're trying to do. Nevertheless, we're including it in the deck because it's just a fun card to run. So there are all our wheels. Let's talk about the payoffs we have. Obviously, our main payoff is Smothering Tithe, allowing us to get a new grip of cards and a huge amount of mana when we cast them. With some good draws, you can easily cast multiple wheel effects in a turn and build up a winning board state. But cards and mana don't win games, so we also have Molten Psyche, which wheels and will deal serious damage to our opponents if cast off the back of other wheels. Arms Collector, which can be used to empty our opponent's hands and draw extra cards for ourselves. Glinthorn Buccaneer and Braylon Skyshark Rider both deal damage to each opponent each time we discard, and Glinthorn comes with the looting ability to help us dig even further. We then have Surly Badgersaw, which can generate treasure, get big, and bite creatures. We have a Geth Grimoire, which will let us draw another card for each time an opponent discards a card, great if we're wheeling everyone's hand away. And lastly, a Confessor, who can gain us back some life as we and our opponents discard cards. He could easily gain 20 life off a single wheel. From this, you can see we're really trying to combo off with this deck in a single huge turn where we draw and play most of our library. But we need specific pieces to make it work, so let's talk about the tutors in this deck. We should be able to draw into wheel effects, since we have so many of them, so all our tutors are aimed at finding our most powerful payoff, Smothering Tithe. Enlightened Tutor can put it on top of our library, and Idyllic Tutor can put it into a hand. We also have Gamble to fetch whatever we need, at the risk of discarding it. And we also have a Sunforger, which can be used to fetch and cast our Enlightened Tutor, along with a bunch of other useful instances in the deck. Unfortunately, that's it for tutors, as Boros is kind of limited in that regard, so let's move on. We can't just rely on the wheels to win us the game, so let's talk about some of the more powerful Boros cards we're running. Aurelia the War Leader is there to allow us to do extra combat damage to our opponents. She combos great with a Tali Primal Storm to steal cards for our opponents, and Dragon Mage for multiple wheel effects in a turn. We have Gazella Blade of Gold Knight, which helps prevent damage to us while doubling it to our opponents, which works well with our discard pingers. Lastly, we have Hound the Host to try and copy these powerful creatures, and to combo off with Aurelia. We also need good graveyard recursion in this deck to get back cards that we end up discarding. For that, we have Underworld Breach, which allows us to play any cards from our graveyard for an escape cost, Elixir of Immortality so that we can put our graveyard back into our library if we start running out of cards, Fast and Flames, which has flashback, so it can be used from our graveyard to help cast other things from the graveyard, Sun Titan, which is just a really strong value piece for fetching back all our utility pieces, Savine's Reclamation, which can be flashed back to pull something out, and lastly Hall of Heliod's Generosity so that we can put Smothering Tithe back on top of our library if we need it. But as we fill up our graveyard, so will our opponents, so we also need graveyard interaction to get rid of theirs. This comes in the form of Soul Guide Lantern, one of the best graveyard hoses all around, and Scavenger Grounds, which exiles all graveyards. Now you don't really want to exile your own graveyard with this deck, but sometimes you have to because there's some old Drotha at the table or something ridiculous. With all that wheel specific detail out of the way, let's quickly go over the ramp, removal, draw, and land packages for this deck, which are all pretty standard for Boros. For our ramp, we have Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble, Arcane Signet, Boros Signet, Mindstone, Talisman of Conviction, Thought Vessel, Knight of the White Orchid, Solemn's Mulacrum, Myriad Landscape, and of course Smothering Tithe. This is a pretty standard ramp package in my opinion, 10 sources of ramp, plus Smothering Tithe for mid-game acceleration. I am very glad to see Thought Vessel finally getting a reprint in Legends, as it's back to a reasonable price again. Lastly, we have a land tax to get lands into hand and to make land drops. However, it's mostly used to just simply get more cards into hand for our self-wheels. Our removal includes Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, Red Elemental Blast, Boros Charm, Chaos Warp, Generous Gift, Crush Contraband, Austere Command, Arrow Revelation, and Blasphemous Act. The removal package is probably a little bit light for what I would normally run, however for this deck, where you'll be seeing a lot of cards, you should be able to hit what you need when you need it. Because all these wheel effects are in our deck, our straight draw effects are fairly limited. We have Faithless Looting to filter out our hand a bit, the new Jessica's Will, which makes mana and exiles 3 cards that we can play. We have Mangara the Diplomat, who will draw plenty of cards if we keep our opponent's hands well stocked. Land tax can be used to fill our hands so that effects like Tectonic Reformation can allow us to cycle those lands away. We have the new War Room, which allows us to draw a card for effectively 4 mana and 2 life. And lastly we have our Commander, who will exile a card each turn, which we can play. For lands, we have a bunch of the Boros dual lands, including Battlefield Forge, Boros Garrison, Inspiring Vantage, Rugged Prairie, Temple of Triumph, and Command Tower. Now, I wouldn't normally play a bounce land like Boros Garrison, but because we actually want cards in hand, I think it fits here. Then we have all 6 of the red and white cycling lands, Secluded Steppe, Forgotten Cave, Desert of the Fervent, Desert of the True, Drifting Meadow, and Smouldering Crater. Once again, you normally shouldn't run these cycling cards, however they are invaluable for our combo turns for digging deeper into our library. Nothing worse than bricking after a wheel with a bunch of lands. Lastly, we have a couple of utility lands, Scavenger Grounds for dealing with graveyards, which actually works well with the other deserts we've included, Hall of Heliod's Generosity for some recursion, Myriad Landscape for ramping, Tectonic Edge for land destruction, the new War Room for drawing cards, and a Reliquary Tower for those times when we just have lots of cards in hand, but we can't actually cast them. Lastly, we have a bit of soft stacks to slow down our opponents. This includes Authority of the Consoles for life gain and tapping creatures, Thalia Heretic Cathar for tapping down and blocking, and an Arms Collector to prevent mass draw. Feel free to switch these out with cards of your choice depending on how strong or weak you want the stacks package. So that's the majority of the cards in the deck, but let's talk about how it's actually played. Obviously the main goal of the deck is to resolve Smothering Tithe and get a wheel off, after which we should be able to cast a lot of things from our library. The best way to do this is with Winds of Chains at just 1 mana. It's pretty easy to drop at the same turn as the Tithe, and instantly start the combo. Ideally you want to hold Smothering Tithe in hand until you can play it and wheel in the same turn, but that's not always possible. We do have a red Elemental Blast to hopefully hit counterspells, but like with the wheels, it won't always be in hand. If we do get Smothering Tithe out, the next target to find is Underworld Breach. With both these out and a discard based wheel in the graveyard, we should be able to draw our entire library and kill all our opponents. Each cast will fill our graveyard with more targets for Underworld Breach, while also creating more mana with Smothering Tithe. Using this, we can dig through our library to find damage-based payoffs like Braylon and start killing our opponents. We can also just mill our opponents out by casting wheels over and over, however that won't work if they have a Shuffle Eldrazi or something. Even without a loop, just casting a few wheels with damage triggers out should be enough to kill most players in the late game, and Gazella will help pump up that damage as well. If we can't find our smothering, simply casting a wheel with Arms Collector out will ruin our opponents as well. However, making a play like that will make you the target of the table, so be prepared to win soon after. We are also running Aurelia the War Leader and the Helm of the Host combo, which allows for infinite combat steps and angels. Each time we go to combat, we make another Aurelia, who in turn attacks and makes another combat step. Once equipped, you can just keep making angels in combat until everyone is dead. It is a fairly mana expensive combo however, as playing both the Helm and equipping is 9 mana and Aurelia is another 6. But it does act as an alternate combo in the deck in case something happens to our Smothering Tithe or we just get locked out. Lastly, we have the red finisher, Insurrection, which is to take all the creatures on the table and swing at everyone at once. Since we'll be keeping everyone's hands pretty full with our wheels, if anyone builds up a sizable board state, this could be easily used to finish off the game. It may not be the most unique way to win, but hey, sometimes you just need to go with the classics. So that's the deck I've made for Borca. I'd rate this as about a 7 on the power scale. It has some combos and tutors, but it is running an off-color strategy of wheels and Boros, rather than something like Izzet, where it has a lot more support. Certainly don't play this against someone with a precon, as it's a proper mid-strength commander deck. Now onto some honourable mentions that didn't quite make the deck for various reasons. First up, let's talk about that reserve list. Obviously Wheel of Fortune would be amazing in this deck, but right now it's $230 for a good condition card, so it's way outside the price range of this deck. Memory Jar is another reserve list option that would fit well into the deck, however at $40 it was simply too pricey for the effect it provides. If your group plays with proxies, these are obvious includes. I've also cut Wheel of Fate from the deck for being too slow. I want to be able to cast my wheels the turn I draw them, and in my opinion Wheel of Fate is too telegraphed for our opponents. They simply can play around them. I also cut Burning Inquiry because it doesn't do quite what I need in the deck. Half a wheel is okay, but it's still too big a risk when I could just play another full wheel or loot effect instead. I cut Collective Defiance and Heartwarming Redemption because I had enough self wheels in the deck already. The aim isn't to wheel ourselves, it's to wheel our opponents. The brand new Jeweled Lotus also fits well into the deck, allowing for a turn 1 Borca Bell. It's not game breaking in this deck, but again, I'd include it if it was not for the cost. Sacred Foundry, Clifftop Retreat, and the new Spectator seating were cut so that we could fit other cards into the deck, but they would be automatic inclusions as untapped dual lands. If I wanted to make this deck even stronger, I'd look at adding even more stacks pieces. Drannith Magistrate, Aven Mind Sensor, Hushbringer, Grand Abolisher, Linvala of Keeper of Silence, and Hushwing Griff. I personally didn't want to take this into a harder stacks direction, but this is how you'd push it to the next level, slowing down your opponents so you could get to your combo easier. So that's it for this deck tech. Thanks for watching. Give the video a like if it's helped you out, because that helps us out, and I'll see you next time.